Will you be remembered after you're dead? The Z-List Deadlist podcast about obscure people from history with me, Izzy Lawrence. In 1474, a chicken passing for a rooster laid an egg and was prosecuted by the law in the city of Basel. Now, we're inclined to dismiss the event as foul play, but in those days, lusus naturale was no joke. The animal was sentenced to a solemn judicial proceeding and condemned to be burned alive for the heinous and unnatural crime of laying an egg. The execution took place with great solemnity, as would have been observed in the consigning of a heretic to the flames, and it was witnessed by an immense crowd of townsmen and peasants. This is from a book by Evans in 1906, and in the case of the Rooster of Basel, the executioner claimed to have found 3 more eggs in him, according to the Chronicle of the City. Now, Evans, who might become the Z-List Deadlister of this case, refused to believe that part of the Chronicle. He declared that it was observed and regarded the event not as a freak of nature, but as a freak of an excited imagination tainted with superstition. Evans knew that eggs presumed to come out of roosters caused panic because people believed that cocks' eggs were used in witchcraft. Moreover, the same egg, according to the ancient folk belief, might produce a dreaded monster known as the basilisk or cockatrice, a malignant winged reptile with the head of a cock and the tail of a serpent, which destroyed men and things by its breath and its glance. As we all know, because we all read Harry Potter Chamber of Secrets, it can petrify cats, and also spiders flee before it. That's something I also remembered. Now, before I get too bogged down in Harry Potter, I was going through an old hard drive and I actually found a recording I thought I'd lost. And it is of Neil Denny at the Z-List Deadlist, where he is presenting his Z-Lister. And you might recognise who it is, because I've just been talking about him. It's the man who wrote the book about the chicken who laid an egg and got burnt alive for it. But was that chicken a rooster or a hen? You're going to have to find out, aren't you? I'll be back with you after Neil.
Okay, so this is Edward Payson Evans. He's not a talk Has anybody heard of him at all?
No.
That's what we want to hear. The last time I did this, I cheated by doing someone who was described in his lifetime as the second most famous man in the world after Napoleon. I changed the rules a little bit, but I'm doing it properly this time. So Edward Payson Evans, I've become a bit unhealthily obsessed with a book that he wrote, which is one of the funniest books I've read in my life. But we'll get to that in a moment. So I'll plug you through a bit of background information on him, which is not very interesting, to be honest. He was a historian, theologian and a linguist, professor of languages at the University of Michigan from 1861. He wrote a couple of previous books. Some of you may be familiar with his classic Animal Symbolism in Ecclesiastical Architecture, I'm not sure. It was a bestseller at the time. But then in 1906 he wrote this book, which is called The Criminal Prosecution and Capital Punishment of Animals. And it's a very important scholarly dissertation on an important aspect of historical criminal law. And it's also absolutely hilarious. There's a funny story on every single page of it. The original version, this version, you can still buy it very expensively somewhere, and there's basically the text is on the internet, you can see that. But there's a updated version which only has parts of it in it called Animal Trials, which I bought. In fact, I think there's a slide of that, so let's get to that. This is where I first came across it, interviewing a guy called Jesse Baring on Little Atoms radio show not more than about 3 months ago. And subsequently, I've gone out and bought the book and devoured it and absolutely fallen in love with it. As you can notice, this is called Perv, the Sexual Demon in Us All, and it's talking about human sexuality, which may give you an indication of the direction we're going to go in a bit later. Until we get there. Well, yeah, that's my copy of Animal Trials. I love the cover. Look at that accusatory finger pointing at the pig. It's the pig's fault. Whatever we're going to So, before we get to, we're going to get to some trials that involved animals and people. But before we get there, I'll tell you some of the ones that are in the book. This is in the original version. There's illustrations as well. This was a pig that was he was executed for stealing a communion wafer. This is a cat that's being hung. It says a cat hung up in Cheapside, habited like a priest. I've no idea why they dressed it as a priest. It basically killed being shit at his job and not catching enough rats. And now I've mentioned rats, I was going to preface this, but seeing that I'm last, I'm going to read it from the book because I can take as long as I want. So, animals were put on trial, and it was a proper trial, and they were given lawyers to defend them. So this is the story of one of the lawyers. It is, and I'm reading it from the book because he tells it better than I do. It is said that Bartholomew Chaucenet, a distinguished French jurist of the 16th century, made his reputation at the bar as a counsel for some rats. Which had been put on trial before the ecclesiastical court of Autun on a charge of having feloniously eaten up and wantonly destroyed the barley crop of that province. So the rats had eaten all the barley, they'd been put on trial for this. So basically the lawyer, in fact again, I'll read it, there's a better description here than I sort of press this. So, okay, so it says, in view of, this is how he gets them off, basically. In view of the bad repute and notorious guilt of his client, Chaucenet was forced to employ all sorts of legal shifts and chicanery. He basically, he suggested that because there were so many rats around the place, just one summons of the rats, rats were all around loads of different villages in the area, one summons of them would not be enough because the rats would not have had a chance to have seen the summons. So first of all, he says there needs to be another summons, which basically takes longer, and what he's going for is that it will eventually go past the sort of statute of limitations, first of all. Then he suggests, and where's this? I need to read you this bit. At the expiration of a considerable time, which elapsed before this order could be carried out into effect and the proclamation be duly made, he excused the default or non-appearance of his clients on the ground of the length and difficulty of the journey and serious perils which attended it, owing to the unwearied vigilance of their mortal enemies, the cats, who watched all the movement and with fell intent lay in wait for them at every corner and passage. Basically, he argued that the rats couldn't come to court because they would be attacked on the rats by the way. He argued this in court, they got off, basically. He won, the rats got off with it. So, I'm going to put down. Well, now I don't need that anymore. Now here's one, this is an interesting one, which if you've been paying attention, this is a pig dressed in breeches and a jacket in Normandy in a town called Falaise. This pig was put on trial for infanticide, and it explicitly says in the court records, the pig was sentenced to be mangled and maimed in the head and forelegs, then dressed and hung for having torn the face and arms of a baby in its cradle, although it was a Friday. What that means is the pig broke the traditional fast on a Friday, it wasn't supposed to eat meat on a Friday, and this seriously aggravated its offence. And so the reason it was tortured before being executed for eating the face of a baby was because it had eaten the face of a baby on a Friday.
Let's pause, Neil, right there and go back to our rooster of Basil laying an egg and getting burnt and tortured for it back in 1474. Now, I say rooster, obviously it was a hen. I mean, it has to be a hen. Even Evans says it was a hen, because it's obvious to all of us that any egg under suspicion could ultimately be traced to a hen, surely. But let us jump forward in time. Evans was writing in 1906. In the winter of 1921 to 22, the National Poultry Journal of London was full of news about a chicken being exhibited in a poultry show at Westminster, which attracted a great deal of interest. A buff Orpington with the voice and manners of a hen, but with the plumage of a rooster, was reported to have laid eggs. The truth was obscured because a practical joker kept putting all kinds of eggs of different colours from different breeds into the pen. But a student at the Ayrshire Training Centre, overcome by the zeal to know the truth, performed a crucial experiment which has been almost, but not quite, lost to history. In the January 6th edition, 1922, of the National Poultry Journal, Mr. H.M.B. Spur reported his observations. On December 22nd, a fellow trainee had noticed that the bird in question had laid an egg. On the 24th, Christmas Eve, Mr. Spur, who was on trap nesting duty, found the bird in number 4 nest box, number 6 pen, at 11:45 a.m. He immediately took possession of the poultry house key, locked the house, and continued his tour of duty. Returning at 12:25, he released the bird and removed a small but typical Buff Orpington egg. In his own words, as reported in the National Poultry Journal of Great Britain, "Seeing is believing. And although previously doubtful, I am now assured that this cock of the south does not lie, it lays." So, was that conviction of a chicken in 1474 really a rooster? Ha 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 ha! Could have been. I don't know if we can convince Evans of that, but let's go back to Neil Denny and find out more about the trials and tribulations of animals.
Right. Okay. So now we're going to get to the bit that I want to talk about, which is from Jesse's book, and this takes place in New Haven in Connecticut, which is a place that one day is going to be the home of Yale University, the famous Ivy League university, and of course the alma mater of some of the greatest minds that the world has ever known. But this is a long time before that. We're in colonial times. This is roughly the same time. You'll all have heard of the Salem witch trials, which take place in 1692 in this sort of general area. And it's the same sort of febrile atmosphere that causes this, a much less well-known, it's 50 years earlier, 1642, a much less well-known but infinitely funnier set of trials, which came to be known as the New Haven Pigmen trials. Okay. That's the New Haven Pigmen trials. And just for the avoidance of doubt, it's not about him. So, a guy called Thomas Granger, 16-year-old farm boy. Now, I have to say that it seems to me a bit of an injustice that Thomas Granger is included in Payson Evans's description of this trial called the New Haven Pigmen trials, because there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever it would seem that Thomas Granger had any sort of dealings with a pig at all. He was actually indicted for, shall we say, improper relations with a mare, a cow, 2 goats, 5 sheep, 2 calves, and a turkey. But he definitely didn't fuck any pigs. That's the important thing. Right, before I tell you the conclusion of that trial, I'm going to go on to talk about some people who did, or at least were accused of having improper relations with pigs. I want to talk for a moment about, and bear with me on this, please. I want to talk about why they thought it was wrong. Now, there's this guy, Thomas Aquinas, okay. In the Bible, it explicitly says in Leviticus or somewhere that, a man shall not lie down with an animal. Nowadays, if people have sex with animals, or, there's just recently been a trial in Ipswich where this happened. A guy was on trial for that thing. Nowadays, we tend to think of it in terms of animal welfare and stuff like that, the harm it's done to an animal. This is the medieval times. They didn't give a shit about animal welfare. It's nothing to do with that. But they believed at the time, as is always mentioned with Mary Toft, she told you that story, they believed that it was perfectly possible for an animal and a human being to have offspring. And Thomas Aquinas particularly, he's one of the greatest theologians that ever lived. And as well as all the amazing stuff he did, he also spent an inordinate amount of time puzzling over whether or not animals and human beings should have sex. And he basically comes up with, and you all know the word prodigy, which when I say prodigy, you'll think of a young 9-year-old Chinese boy being forced by his parents to practice the violin all day. But Thomas Aquinas coined this word, and it meant exactly that, the offspring of a human being and an animal. And because this was explicitly prohibited by the Bible, that meant that it was obviously sanctioned by the devil. And if a human being and an animal had this prodigious offspring, they would grow up, they would be like demons, they would be wandering the medieval countryside, and obviously latterly colonial New England, basically scaring the children and ruining the crops and things. So this obviously wasn't allowed. So that's why they thought it was wrong. Let's just get that clear. That's why they thought it was wrong, not because they cared about the animals. So let's talk about what happens to Thomas Granger. So yeah, he's convicted in the end, but only for the relations with sheep. But the area has lots of sheep, and they haven't actually identified which are the sheep that he's supposed to have sex with. Because the important thing is, the sheep are on trial as well. They're going to be killed as well if they're found guilty. So basically they form this sort of like sheepy identity parade where he's forced to pick out the sheep that he's supposedly had relationships with. And then, according to the court records, the animals were killed before his face, according to the laws of Leviticus, and then he himself was executed, by which they mean he was burned at the stake. Okay, so a servant called George Spencer was put on trial for making love to his master's pig. That's what it says again in the documents. And in this case, there was really unassailable evidence to a 17th century jurist against George Spencer, because the sow that he's supposed to have had the relationship with had recently given birth to a stillborn piglet, and court records describe this piglet as having but one eye for use, the other half, as it is called, a pearl in it. It is whitish and deformed. And George Spencer was blind in one eye. He had a cataract and therefore a white eye. So, absolutely banged her eyes. He didn't do it. He obviously goes to the gallows, vociferously denying he's done this, but he's executed.
Now, of course, the most famous of all the trials of animals that in the UK, at any rate, is of course the monkey of Hartlepool. But in Hartlepool, they hung the little monkey Hartlepool in 1810. Hartlepool has never been forgotten, and I'll sing about it now just like they sang about it then. People outside the UK hopefully don't know this about them, but too late, now they do. Hartlepool people are called monkey hangers because in 1810 a monkey was hanged in Hartlepool, England. It was during the Napoleonic Wars. There's a French ship. It was wrecked in the storm off the coast of Hartlepool. The only survivor from the ship was a monkey, allegedly dressed in a French army uniform to provide amusement for the crew. And on finding the monkey, some locals decided to hold an impromptu trial, and as the monkey was unable to answer their questions, presumably because it only spoke French, they decided, having never met a Frenchman before, this must be a Frenchman, and so they concluded the monkey was a spy, and being found guilty, it was sentenced to death and was hanged on the beach. So now Boothby Graffoe does an amazing song about this, which I will include at the end of this episode of the Z-List Dead List. If you can, go see Boothby Graffoe on tour. He is amazing. Also, you should be checking out Neil Denny's podcast, Little Atoms. Here he is effectively reviewing a book by Edward Payson Evans in 1906. He reviews many good books. I get lots of my book recommendations off Mr. Neil Denny, including one by John Higgs, which I read recently, which I really enjoyed. So, we'll go back. Shall we just have another pig trial? Shall we just do that? I think we should.
And one more pig trial to talk about, which is it's a rather unfortunate case of nominative determinism, which I think might have had something to do with why he ended up. This is a guy called Thomas Hogg. Now, this case caused such a massive furore that the governor of the colony himself attended not a trial, but Thomas was basically forced into a barn where he was confronted with the pig that he's supposed to have had the relationship with, and another random control pig, and he was based upon. And again, this is the official word from the court documents. But he was forced to fondle both of the pigs to see which one he was more intimately familiar with. And again, the trial documents say immediately they appeared a working of lust in the sow, insomuch as she poured out seed before them. Now, if we just brush over their obviously sketchy pig biology there, presumably the pig pissed itself or something, I don't know what happened. But the other pig didn't, therefore, again, this was incontrovertible proof that he'd had a relationship with one pig. It got all excited when he'd come near him. Thomas Hogg and the pig, they avoided the barbecue in this time, but they were both hanged again. So, I want to finish up on just one other trial from Edward Payson Evans' book, which I think is quite famous. You may have heard of this one, and it takes place about 100 years later after the Pigmen trials in France. In a France it's sort of pre-Enlightenment, pre-revolutionary, but things are sort of starting to change. And a peasant named Jacques Ferron was basically caught in flagrante with a donkey, with a female donkey. Not that I think that makes any difference, but it was. They were both put on trial. Now, Jacques Ferron he was really unpopular. Nobody in the village liked him, and this probably had something to do with why he ended up on trial. But the donkey, however, and I don't know what this really means, but the donkey was an extremely popular donkey in the community. Everybody loved this donkey, and I don't know again whether it would have made a difference if the donkey had been ornery and unpopular, I don't know. But it was so popular that a letter was submitted to that effect to the court that says, according to Payson Evans, the letter said they were willing to bear witness that she is in word and deed and in all her habits of life a most honest creature. Now, because of this, the donkey basically got off. They decided that the donkey was a victim. The point being, he basically raped the donkey. Ferron had basically raped this donkey. The donkey had nothing to do with it. He had no agency in the thing. He was convicted. She was acquitted. And it's a really important case in criminal law because it's the first time recorded in Western law that happens, that an animal is deemed to be not responsible for its own actions and the human being is deemed in some way to have harmed the animal. Progress of sorts. Jacques Ferron was burnt at the stake, so yes, perhaps not. So that's why I want you to vote for Payson Evans. Thank you very much.
So thank you for listening to this episode of the Z-List Deadlist. I'm aware I'm not putting these out as much as I should be, or could be, but actually no, I am doing it about as much as I could be. You could probably tell that my voice is slightly croaky, and that is because I've had an illness, and also I've got an interview to do about pirates this week. I've got making history stuff to be reading and putting together, and also I am writing like crazy. I have a book out on the 6th of February 2020, so if you want to go out and get that, if you can pre-order it, it is on Bloomsbury. It is called The Unstoppable Letty Peg. It is about a little girl whose mum is a suffragette, her dad's a policeman, and she's made to do jiu-jitsu. She's not made to, she enjoys doing jiu-jitsu. It's a really fun little romp, and it is 9 to 12, so Harry Potter age. I read Harry Potter, therefore it's for all of you. And it has some amazingly good jiu-jitsu in it. So Kataguruma is one of the first throws. Just saying, it's good. Anyway, so I'm going to leave you there. And instead of our usual wonderful music by Geoffrey Lewis, we're going to have this amazing song about the killing of an innocent monkey back in 1810. And guaranteed you will remember this, and you'll remember the name Boothby Graffoe, and you'll go and see him live. I will provide links to all of this in the show notes.
There were 6, maybe 10, maybe half a dozen men walking down the beach at 9, walking back again, happy with the money they were getting from the king, watching for the dangers of the French Napoleon. Wasn't far away, he was just across the shore, setting out his tables with his plans for global war, standing on the chair so he could see a little more. History records that he was really rather short. So there's half a dozen, 10, maybe 6 strong band saw a little monkey that was sitting on the sand. Thought it was a Frenchie, so they chased it through the sea, caught it in the dunes, tried to string it from a tree. And the story is that they put it on trial, asked it lots of questions, tortured it a while, didn't speak the lingo so it never said a word. Then they tried to hang it, which is where it gets absurd. It was a monkey. They have a tail. You try to hang on, you're gonna fail. It was Hartlepool where they hung the little monkey. Hartlepool back in 1810. Hartlepool, it's never been forgotten, and I sing about it now just like they sang about it then. Hartlepool where they hung the little monkey. Hartlepool back in 1810. Hartlepool, it's never been forgotten, and I sing about it now just like they sang about it then. thems that say it was maybe not a monkey that was hung that day with a rope around his throat, but an alien who'd fallen off his spaceship and washed up on the shore just like he'd fallen off a boat. Cause his face was weird, his clothes were funny, his ray gun was wet so it wouldn't work. Either way, he was not a lucky bunny to be washed up there of all the places on earth. Hartlepool, where they hung a little monkey. Hartlepool, back in 1810. Hartlepool, it's never been forgotten, and I sing about it now just like they sang about it then. Hartlepool, it's never been forgotten. Hartlepool, back in 1810. Hartlepool, they hung a little monkey, and I sing about it now just like they sang about it then. It was an hard old life in the early 19th century. For the working class it was pain and tears. The food was crap, the air was black, and the average life expectancy was less than 30 years. And when the French set sail, it was for the revolution, calling all the proletariat to join their fold. They had kids on the ships, they called them powder monkeys. They were 6, maybe 7, maybe 8 years old. Hartlepool, where they hung the little monkey. Hartlepool, back in 1810. Hartlepool, it's never been forgotten, and I sing about it now just like they sang about it then. Hartlepool, where they hung the little monkey. Hartlepool, back in 1810. Hartlepool, it's never been forgotten, and I sing about it now just like they sang about it then. Comes down to how you want to be remembered. It all comes down to how you want to be remembered. It all comes down to how you want to be remembered. It all comes down to how you want to be remembered. Hartlepool, where they hung the little monkey. Hartlepool, back in 1810. It all comes down to how you want to be remembered, and I sing about it now just like they sang about it then. Hartlepool, where they hung the little monkey. Hartlepool, back in 1810. It all comes down to how you want to be remembered, and I sing about it now just like they sang about it then.
Oh, you guys are crazy.